Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, I suppose, to wherever anyone may be somewhere in our world. Thanks so much for joining us here live for Serverless Office Hours. We're streaming on the AWS Twitch channel and on YouTube/Serverless Land and also on LinkedIn Live. I'm Julian Wood. I'm a developer advocate for Serverless here at AWS, and I'm super happy to have two experts who are going to be talking us through some cool stuff. Aniket, welcome to Serverless Office Hours. Your first time. How long have you been at AWS, and what made you join?
Thanks a lot, Julian. Thanks for having us. Hi, everyone. My name is Aniket. As Julian mentioned, this is the first time I'm coming onto the show. So I've been with AWS for about 3 years now, but have been in this role for a year. And to answer your question about what made me join AWS, I think it's the AWS, the brand, as well as the excitement of the cloud. And like having joined it right out of school, I could see that cloud is so powerful and it's fun to play around with. And then just immediately landed up messing around with like serverless stuff, and just never stopped there.
Cool. Well, yeah, you picked the right thing. So good job out of school to get that. And then returning guest, Nick Smit. Nick, how are you? Welcome back to Serverless Office Hours. Yeah, Nick, you've been nearly 5 years at AWS, and I mean, you started EventBridge. So yeah, tell us your journey and what you've been doing.
Well, I was one of the many that started EventBridge. I personally flicked the switch, but yeah. So I joined. You're right. It's coming up on 5 years, which just has flown by. Before that, I did a whole lot of kind of work in startup land and had my own startup. And so what really attracted me to AWS was just how entrepreneurial it allows you to be. How there's a lot of kind of opportunity to do things autonomously and be able to launch something really big like EventBridge that ends up having a whole lot of impact, and that you can kind of grow from the start of a service to something that has lots of different features, lots of different capabilities. So I've loved that journey along the way.
Cool, yeah, because you've been through from the beginning and all through it. Yeah, you're the proper guru on EventBridge. And also remember, we are live. It's Office Hours. We are live. So send us your questions, send us your comments. We love to know where you're from. It's interesting to see where people are switching in from. So yeah, super cool. Just going to spend a few minutes looking back over the past week of Serverless at AWS before we get onto our cool topic today. Last week's stream was all about API gateway and private integrations, where you could do a whole bunch of things behind application load balancers and network load balancers and all kind of cool things. So Leo and Anna were on the stream, and this and all other previous streams are on youtube.com/serverlessland with a whole bunch of other videos as well. So yeah, lots of info over there. Then what's new in AWS Serverless over the past week? Well, Cognito has got some provision capacity for API limits. So this is just a way that you can just a better way to manage your limits. And of course, Step Functions is also coming out with always new integrations, 33 new services, including Amazon Q. And Amazon Kinesis as well, just shunting more stuff around. So now streaming data, not even into an AWS service, but into Snowflake, using Kinesis data, Firehose, and Snowflake Snowpipe. So that's pretty cool. In terms of some blog posts, also Step Functions on the top of the list. This is actually an interesting one. This is invoking on-premises resources interactively using IoT Core. I'm shortening that slightly because otherwise I'm going to trip over my own words. But yeah, this is actually a cool thing using Step Functions with IoT Core, which can use MQTT and to invoke on-premises resources. What a cool idea from Alex and Peter. But that's the past week of AWS. Today, we are talking about Salesforce and EventBridge and connecting. And there are a whole bunch of things. I even struggled to put all the things on the slide because there's so many use cases and so many different ways you could think about this, connecting even on-premises stuff to Salesforce, EventBridge, Kafka, all these kind of things. So, Nick, over to you first. Like, what's the bigger story here of Salesforce and using EventBridge?
Yeah, great question. So, I think the starting point for us here is just we see so many customers that are kind of building on AWS end up using purpose-built SaaS applications that are super good at a particular area of business to kind of just jumpstart their approach into that space. So like if you're doing CRM, if you're doing sales or marketing, you could go and build a whole lot of these tools yourself. But that's a lot of work, and you're not a specialist in it. So you get these great platforms like Salesforce that will offer those capabilities for you. And so a lot of businesses out there are saying, let's choose these kind of best-in-class tools that can run some aspect of our business really well for us. And so Salesforce comes up often as a way to kind of do everything from managing your leads, for being able to handle your marketing through Marketing Cloud. There's a whole ton of different Salesforce clouds that are really purpose-built and highly specialized for certain kind of business tasks. But what we find is that you typically never use Salesforce on its own. You're always using something else with Salesforce, right? You have your own applications that you might be running, where you expose web interfaces, and your customers might place orders online, and you've got to hook that up to Salesforce. You might have leads being generated through some of your capabilities of your online website. You might have kind of marketing funnels where you need data from Salesforce to kind of enrich information on your website to kind of offer a more tailored, personalized experience to someone on your website. So very often what you're having to do is connect the data that's in Salesforce to your applications running on AWS. And so last year, actually, I think it was kind of the year before that, but it went GA last year, we launched the capability to integrate Salesforce with EventBridge, where you could publish events from Salesforce when anything changed in Salesforce to your event bus in EventBridge. And this made it very easy to then react to those changes in Salesforce using AWS services. So an example here might be, a new lead is created in Salesforce, and you want to go and kick off some process internally to go and take some steps, like potentially assign that lead to whoever's best placed to go and follow up on it. Perhaps you want to run some kind of proprietary algorithm that you've written in Lambda to go and figure out the probability of that lead actually converting. There might be a ton of different AWS services you want to use to react to that. So we kind of launched that integration with Salesforce. This replaced a couple of other approaches you could have used to connecting to Salesforce. In the past, there was an option to use a technology called CometD, which is essentially this polling kind of protocol that allows you to connect to Salesforce and sit there polling for updates. But this didn't scale very well. It was really inefficient to run. And so this replacement that we have, where Salesforce allows you to connect directly to your event bus and deliver events, is much more scalable, much more resilient, and a lot easier to use. So that was kind of in that direction. And we've talked a bit about that in the past, I think here on Serverless Office Hours as well. But a lot of what we've also heard from folks is like, hey, we like that going from Salesforce to EventBridge, but it turns out that we have a ton of data in Kafka or in SQS or in various services that we might be running in AWS. And a lot of the time we need to get that data over to Salesforce to kind of update Salesforce with the things that are happening in AWS. And in particular, Kafka is one that we've heard from a lot of folks. They run Kafka throughout their organization. It's a fantastic durable store of data or events in your organization. And so it's become really popular as a way to just collect information about what's happening in your business. And so for customers that use Kafka, they often have a lot of useful information in Kafka that they'd love to go and update their Salesforce instance with. But it turns out doing that is tricky, right? Especially because typically the folks working on Salesforce aren't experts in Kafka, right? Kafka comes with a lot of complexity in figuring out how to connect to Kafka, how to go and pull data from it, and then how to actually move that to Salesforce. And so that's where EventBridge Pipes come in, and where we put in a kind of some effort recently. Aniket's been leading that to actually go and build a working prototype and solution for taking events from Kafka, using EventBridge Pipes, and then delivering them to Salesforce. And some cool things here are just like, you can imagine things like clickstream data around who's actually kind of viewed a particular product on a website. You might want to use that to go and tailor your recommendations or your marketing recommendations in Salesforce. And so being able to take large volumes of data from something like Kafka and in real time update your Salesforce instances is kind of the world that we're thinking about with these examples.
Cool. And obviously it's all about making it simpler, that you're not having to run, a whole bunch of custom code to be able to pull things, because these are just APIs on the internet, but there's there is some complexity with that.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, as we get through the demos, especially today, we'll be able to talk through what that complexity is, what it looks like if you are actually writing code yourself to go and do the stuff instead of using something like a pipe to do it for you.
Cool. So just sort of flipping it then the other way around, there may be people watching who use Salesforce a lot, and they're like, "Oh, this sounds cool," but I don't quite know this integration or this EventBridge kind of thing. So I know you had something to share, just talking it from that side as well.
Yeah, so good point. I think that's always the challenge when you're using two different systems. Is you might have someone who's an expert in Salesforce, someone who's an expert in AWS. Rare to get someone that knows both of those well together. If you are one of those people, reach out to us. We would love to talk to you and learn more. But yeah, so I think the idea today is to try and help anyone that's on either side of that world. Either you're in Salesforce world, you want to learn more about AWS, or vice versa. And so I think what we'll start off with, Julian, is just a couple of slides to kind of talk about event-driven architectures. Give a little bit of background for anyone that's coming from the Salesforce side on just what this whole thing of EventBridge is, what the service looks like, and how it works. So if you're familiar with the AWS side, the next few minutes will maybe be a bit of a reminder of some things you know about. But if you're watching this on recording, skip ahead if you know AWS and event-driven architectures, and you'll get to the meat of the AWS side. So, we talk a lot about event-driven architectures with EventBridge. And really, event-driven architectures are a way of an architectural pattern of building your application where, you emit an event being a notification that state has changed in a particular system. We talk about events being immutable. You can't change them. You clicked a button, you created a user. These are all things that happened in the past. And that's really what an event is. It describes this thing that happened in the past. And so by using events to build our applications, we're able to get these architectures that allow us to move a lot quicker when modernizing our applications. We can take an old system that's perhaps kind of really difficult to change, and instead just emit events from it. And that allows us to then react to those events and make changes to the application or add new capabilities to the application quite easily. We also find that using event-driven architectures allows us to accelerate the kind of pace with which we can build things. And the reason for that is because event-driven architectures inherently are decoupled and asynchronous. So instead of these kind of point-to-point synchronous integrations that we build between our different services or our different applications that are running, we instead, with event-driven architectures, can build new functionality without having to go and bug another team to help us to go and integrate with their system. And so that allows our teams to act more independently and move quicker. And I think this demo that we'll get to, later today, we find that event-driven architectures allow you to build kind of more immersive integrate or applications for your customers. So you can think about how many applications you probably still interact with today that have some kind of a batch process running every hour, every day, in some cases every month, where the kind of interaction that you're having with that application is not updating as you make changes, right? So this might be from watching something online and only getting your recommendations updated every day or every week. It might be things like swiping your credit card somewhere and only getting the kind of entry into your statement at the end of the month. So all of these things are kind of batch jobs where, as an end customer, your experience isn't kind of as delightful. So the really cool thing with event-driven is we're able to go and make those updates as soon as they happen. So as soon as a customer signs up on or purchases something and that order comes through in Salesforce, we could reflect that in some other system. We don't have to wait for a batch job to import it. Immediately, the event triggers an update. And so we find those applications that you end up being able to build just feel more immersive and kind of more interesting when you're using them. So those are some of the kind of benefits that we see of this idea of event-driven architectures. So if you want to learn more about these topics, there's two great resources. The first is Serverless Land, and in particular, there's a section there on EDA visuals done by Dave Boyne, which I think does a great job of just showing event-driven architectures and how they work. If you're looking for kind of a higher level view of just what is this whole asynchronous event-driven world, Werner Vogels did a keynote speech at reInvent. If you just search Google or YouTube for Werner Vogels keynote 2022, you'll see this wonderful kind of 40-minute topic exploration that he does around the world being asynchronous and just it's a really fun kind of skit that he has there that explains this topic. Okay, so that's event-driven architectures. Let's talk a little bit about EventBridge now. EventBridge is really AWS's way of providing tools to build event-driven architectures. And there's 3 key services within, excuse me, EventBridge that allow you to do that. So the first is our Event Bus service. This service has existed for a number of years, as Julian called out. And the Event Bus has a number of integrations with different AWS services, with third-party SaaS applications like, excuse me, Salesforce. And then it allows you to integrate those various sources of events with different AWS services. So that's our Event Bus service. We then have a service called Pipes. We'll get into that in a bit more detail just now, but essentially Pipes brings lots of the Event Bus capabilities to a whole range of other AWS services. And then finally, we have the Scheduler service that allows you to create schedules much like you would create a cron job. Scheduler allows you to schedule the invocation of a particular target, like a Lambda function or step function, based on some kind of a schedule. These schedules can be repeated schedules. They could be once-off schedules as well. And so we think of all of those schedule ticks when a schedule fires as events, and thus it kind of fits into the event-driven world. So today we're going to be focusing in on the Event Bus and the Pipes service in EventBridge. We talked about event buses. We have those sources of events. Events can come from AWS services. You can publish your own events from your own applications. But today we're mostly interested in the SaaS integration between Salesforce and between our event bus. And so what we'll see in one of our demos is actually being able to connect up Salesforce to our event bus. The event bus is really this kind of logical construct of a kind of thing that you can send a whole lot of events from different places to. And once events are on the bus, you can then use rules on that bus to specify exactly where you want to deliver those events. And those events can be delivered to AWS services, Lambda, step functions, Kinesis, a whole lot of different AWS services, but also to third-party APIs like Zendesk, Slack. You could send back to Salesforce, and we'll see some of that later on today as well. Just to kind of give you a sense of how those rules work on the event bus, I've got an example of an event here. It's just a blob of JSON data that comes from our order system, and in this case is an order created event. And it's got a payload like a currency and a price and a timestamp. It might have some additional data that relates to our order. So if I'm wanting to subscribe to events on that event bus, I create a rule and I can create a pattern that says, I want to match against or consume any events that have a source field set to com.orders. And so because this particular event is from the com.orders source, it'll match against this rule and get delivered to the target of that rule. So that's really how we consume from an event bus, is we create these things called rules that allow us to kind of pull events off of the event bus. Event buses also come with a ton of additional features that could be kind of useful to you if you're consuming Salesforce events, for example. We offer the ability to archive and replay those events. So you can say, I want to just store events for 30 days, for a year, just indefinitely. And anytime you want, you can come back and say, I want to replay my Salesforce events from this date to this date and to a particular consumer. And then there's capabilities like dead letter queues. For example, if you have some failure in your system, you're able to put those failed events in a separate queue that allows you to go and inspect them and debug what's going on there. We have support for delivering events from the bus to any API on the public internet, and we handle things like authentication and rate control for you. We'll get into the schema registry later, but a great way to go and actually see what do the events look like that are coming onto my bus. What's the payload, what fields are in there. So that makes it easier to keep track of the events that you're publishing. And then event buses allow you to send events cross-account to other AWS accounts. And we also have support for something called global endpoints, where you can fail event ingestion over between different regions. Okay, so very quick primer on event buses and event-driven architectures. For those of you that know AWS, hopefully you're still with us, and we're now going to get into the kind of fun part of the demos. And for those of you that are new to AWS, hopefully that was kind of some helpful background. So Aniket, Julian, I think we'll pause here and then kind of maybe just talk a little bit about the demo itself that we're going to kick off with.
Yeah, sure. And if people are watching the recording as well, there are chapters. So also, you can jump between different parts of the video as well. Just makes it a little bit easier.
So Aniket, maybe you and I can kind of just talk through this one a little bit before we actually get into the demo itself. And so do you want to, with the slide up here, do you want to just give some background to what we're looking at and what we'll look at with the demo?
Yeah, definitely. So basically what you're looking at on the slide here is what the partner integration, the SaaS partner integration for Salesforce with EventBridge looks like. So what that allows us to do is intake or input your Salesforce events. As Nick mentioned, you can have events like order created, opportunity status change, and a bunch of other like new lead created. So you have the ability to take those events and because of the native integration of Salesforce with EventBridge, with a few clicks of with a click of few buttons, you can potentially and you can natively integrate that Salesforce with your Salesforce account with AWS so that you can start consuming these events. So on the screen, you can see a Salesforce event relay. So that's basically the logical construct that Salesforce has for all events that land up. I'm guessing that's similar to what EventBridge Event Bus is. But once that integration is done, all your events will land up on Event Bus. And from there onwards, as a customer, I can create some rules and define some specific targets so that I can take these events for downstream consumptions. So maybe I can use them to create dashboards for analysis of the number of leads created, or maybe I can use them for forecasting, cost modeling, any particular use case that I have.
Cool. Yeah. So that makes sense. So here, I think the thing that's really interesting to me about this is that Salesforce actually has this concept of an event bus, right? I don't know that they talk about that. Oops, where am I going? Hopping through my slides here. They don't necessarily talk too publicly about that. Like it's not like in EventBridge where you have this event bus that you can create, but under the hood, Salesforce has an event bus that is collecting events from all of the different Salesforce clouds, Health Cloud, Marketing Cloud, and essentially aggregating them into this bus. And so their kind of concept, if I look at that and compare that to AWS and to EventBridge, they have the event bus. They then have this idea of channels, which I think looks very similar to rules in EventBridge, which allow you to specify, hey, I'm interested in these particular events from the Salesforce event bus. And then channels have members, which I think of kind of as targets, and then a member can have a relay on it, which delivers that to like to an event bus. And so the parallel for me in AWS land and EventBridge is to say, okay, you have an event bus, you then have rules, which are kind of similar to channels and channel members, and then you have a target, which in this case for the channel is a EventBridge relay, and that relay then delivers it to the event bus in AWS.
Yep. And then I think one more thing I'd like to highlight is once you start with that integration under the hood, and we'll see this in the demo as well, once you navigate to the EventBridge console, a partner event source gets created. That's essentially that's owned by Salesforce, but it's visible in the customer accounts. And events won't land up, or events won't be able to use, the customers won't be able to use those events until that partner event source is associated with Event Bus. So you do really, as a customer, you have that flexibility of deciding which event bus you want those events to land up on, and then using rules, you get to dictate where those events eventually go.
Yeah, that's a one-source setup. You basically set up the configuration between Salesforce and any other SaaS partners, and configure which event bus is going to go on, and the events are going to flow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I've just put the link, and I'll stick up a few links as we're chatting as well. So this is the documentation for setting that up in Salesforce.
Cool. Okay, so I'm going to stop screen sharing, and I think Aniket, you can hop over to giving a bit of a demo here and talking us through what we're gonna kind of play around with today.
Absolutely. Alrighty. So I hope everyone's able to see my screen.
Yeah.
But basically, I am on the EventBridge console. As you can see, On the left-hand side, we have some of the components that Nick talked about, like event buses, event rules, and a lot of other functionalities. But what we are particularly interested is in the partner event source. So as you can see, we have about 56-ish partners, SaaS partners integrated, from whom you can start consuming events. So in order to set this up, I go to Salesforce. I find Salesforce in this list, and I just have to copy the account for which I need to I want to integrate, and then I'm taken to the integration steps to the Salesforce docs. But essentially, what we have to basically do is we have this Postman. We have to send a couple of API requests in order to start the integration. So I have this Postman set up here in my browser, and and as Nick mentioned, one of the first step is creating a channel, which is basically creating a rule. And even before we end up doing that, let's look at the event relay, which as Nick mentioned is the Salesforce equivalent of an event bus. So for the sake of time, I've already pre-configured this event relay. But
Aniket, do you mind just zooming in a little bit, because I know there's
sorry.
not a huge amount on the screen, but it's just easy for the old people like me to see. Thank you.
I wasn't going to say anything, Julian, but
old and blind, obviously.
Is this better?
Yeah, much better.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Right. So as you can see, I already have this event relay that's in running status. But we can just quickly go over this process of creating an event relay. So I click on new event relay and I give it a name, serverless office hours relay. So the next step to that is setting up, choosing a named credential. A named credential is basically the configured credentials for my account with region. So as you can see, I have this AWS US East 1.
So just to dig into this a bit deeper, essentially what we've got to do here is tell Salesforce, hey, I have this AWS account and region, and I want you to connect to that account and region and create this partner event source there. And so the way we do that is Salesforce have this concept of named credentials that allow us to store that information, our account ID and region. So we go into Salesforce, we create a named credential, we give it this ARN that we use that includes our region and our account ID. And using those two things, Salesforce can figure out, hey, where do I go and actually place this partner event source, right?
Yeah. And the beauty of this is because everything is taken care of, under the hood, I don't actually have to go in again in my AWS account, set a bunch of other stuff up. So it's only in Salesforce. Once I set up named credentials, Salesforce takes care of all the credentials, making sure that the authorization and everything is taken care of. So before that, I think I need to create a channel. So if I go back to my API,
maybe just sorry to interrupt you again, but just so hop back to Postman there. And I think what we should talk a bit about here is Postman's this tool for making API calls to, you can make any API call to anything on the internet with Postman. But the cool thing that Salesforce have is this kind of pre-configured setup for Postman. And so what you can do is sign up to Postman and then search for Salesforce platform APIs. And essentially what it does is gives you a way to very easily authenticate with Salesforce and then use that auth token that you get to make API calls to Salesforce. So on the left-hand side, you've got all of these APIs that Salesforce offers. You can see Aniket's got that event platform one expanded. And under that, there's this custom channels and change data capture. So all of the API calls that relate to eventing in Salesforce are under that one area. What's super cool about that is you can just click on one of those. Like, Aniket, could we just do you've got the list channels one up, right?
Yeah.
So if you click on the parameter, is it the parameters section there? Oh no, you've got the body section is up. Well, actually in this case, what it does is it pre-populates the query for you. You can see in the URL there. So Aniket can just hit send. And what this will do is just list all of our channels. But I think the great, and then if there's a kind of a create API call you're going to do, what Salesforce has done with this Postman integration is stub out all of the fields for each request for you. So you don't need to go and read documentation and go like, what fields does this API need to include and whatever else. Salesforce has that all for you. And so it makes interacting with the API a lot easier.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, because when I first saw Postman, I was like, oh, okay, cool. But that's quite at the low level of crafting API calls to be able to do stuff. Well done, Aniket. But so you've leveraged the good old Postman.
See the Salesforce user interface that Aniket had up, we'll get into just now with event relays. It has the user interface for creating the relays, but it first needs Salesforce first needs you to create the channels through their API. That is not available through a UI. So that's why we're using Postman for that part.
Yep. And what Nick just mentioned, when I clicked on the list event channels, if I go back here, if you see the URL, it's automatically taking the variables like endpoint, version, and also the authorization. So when I set up, I obviously have this Postman setup pre-configured. But when I initially set that up, I had to go in and configure those URLs to direct them to my Salesforce account. So I had to give like client ID, client credentials. But from there onwards, Postman automatically takes care of every time I create a new channel, create channel member, list channels. All that gets pre-populated because I've already filled in those details. So if I go in again, if I go in and try to list all the channels that I have, I can just get list event channels, and you can see I already have this event channel created. But for the sake of demo, I'll go in and create a new channel. So I go under change data capture and click go for create a post request to create a channel. And let me give it a relevant name. So let's say office hours. So I give it office hours relay channel under CHN, and I just give it a label that helps me identify this particular channel. And if I hit send, we should see an ID that gets returned and a success message confirming that our channel is created. So the next step the next API call that we have to make is to create a channel member. So I think, Nick, you mentioned channel member is sort of like equivalent to a rule where all the events from on this particular channel will get. We're essentially ensuring that we're setting up that rule to tell Salesforce that whatever events that land up on this channel, we want to make sure that they land up on that event relay that we'll create.
Right. So just going through the request for creating a channel member here, we've got that the name of the channel member, but then it's giving us two properties that we can pass it. So one is the channel that we've just created, right? So we'd have to put that in. So yeah, you're going to copy paste that name, and then the selected entity, that is essentially saying, what Salesforce events do you want to subscribe to? So these could be change data capture events. These could be, in Salesforce, you can actually create what's called platform events, where you can actually emit events in Salesforce yourself. So there's all of these different events that you could subscribe to here. And so the one you've picked is the opportunity change event. So it's super common in Salesforce. You're logging opportunities, and we'll see what that looks like just now in Salesforce. But essentially, we're saying, going back to that EventBridge comparison, this member is like our rule. It's saying, hey, we want to subscribe to this particular Salesforce event.
Yep, and this is essentially the pattern. So opportunity change event, any event that matches this pattern, just send it to the event relay. So if I click on create, okay, I need to give it a different name because I already have this channel member name.
So now we know that you're not faking your API calls, right?
There we go.
Yes. When you see the errors, that's when you know it's real.
Aniket's next level is he's mocking the errors too.
Oh, no way. That's way too much effort, right?
Awesome. So I think we have created the channel member. So now if I go back to my steps for creating an event relay, let me just start it back again because I'm probably going to So I'll just give it a name.
So while you're doing that, we've created our channel, we've created our channel member. Now we want to connect the relay to our channel member, which is the thing that will create the connection to EventBridge.
Yep. So if you see the channel that we created, it's automatically populated and we can choose that channel. So, and the last step is the error recovery option. It just tells what should Salesforce do in case there are any events. So you have the option of resuming from the latest events received. Essentially, the errored events will be skipped, or you just resume from the earliest events that are stored in the event bus. So I'll just choose the default option. And hopefully you should see me. So this is the summary. And once I click save, you should be able to see my event relay has been created, but it's in a status as stopped. So while we wait for, and I think the key there is I have to go in back to edit, and I have the option of changing the state to run. So if I click on save, so as you can see, the status change might take, it's basically starting, and the status might change in a few minutes. But while we are doing that, let me go back to EventBridge again, and under my partner event sources, in a second or so, we should be able to see a new partner source. For the sake of this demo, I already have this partner event source, but soon in a minute or so, we'll definitely see a partner event source in a pending state. So if the viewers remember, I had mentioned that a partner event source gets created, but in order to actually start using those events, I have to associate it with an event bus. So if I go to this event bus that I already created, this is basically if let's say I go back to rules, I go to my rules and I choose this particular event bus. So in order to showcase what exactly happens and how this whole integration works, I have created a rule that will essentially catch all the events landing up on this event bus and route them. So if you see the account event pattern is this particular account, and the target is just CloudWatch log groups. So whatever events happen in Salesforce related to opportunities, they will eventually land up to into CloudWatch logs.
And just quick tip, if anybody's doing anything with EventBridge and you're wanting to work out your rules and everything, logging directly to CloudWatch logs, the way simplest option. Stick that on first and you'll have far less hassle than having to, do it to a Lambda function and then log it through that. EventBridge can log directly to CloudWatch logs.
Yes, and it's really, really good if you want to quickly debug your applications. Everything you have, you just send it to CloudWatch and you eventually see what events land up. So in order to actually see this in action, what I'll just do is I'll create a mock opportunity. So plus office hours. I'll just pick a random date. And I'll choose qualification. So I'll just put in some dummy data and click on save. So what eventually happens is, because we have natively integrated this, we should be able to basically Salesforce takes this event of opportunity change event along with all the details around this opportunity, all the metadata that I basically put in, and we should be able to see that in our CloudWatch logs. So if I go back to my AWS console, there we go. So as you can see, this is the 30th, the event from the 30th. And these are all the fields that Salesforce essentially sent to my AWS console. So as you can see here, the payload and all of the metadata is over here in the payload. So the name, expected revenue, opportunity status, amount, and a bunch of other metadata pertaining to the opportunity itself. So
nice. Demo,
demo works.
So Aniket, what we've shown here is you created a lead in Salesforce. You had that relay that you had configured previously just because it took a bit of time to spin up the new one. So
yep,
you'd set up that relay before. Events went into that event bus. You had a rule that was matching against all of those events and just sent them to CloudWatch logs.
Yep.
So we can see as soon as that change happened in Salesforce, boom, you got that event in CloudWatch logs.
Yep.
And you can go and add other rules to go and send that event to SQS or to a Lambda function, a step function, and kind of process it, any of the data you need to there.
Yep. And I think the beauty of this, while I was obviously setting up this demo, I realized quickly I never had to write a single line of code here.
Right.
I'm definitely not a strong coder, but having to imagine like setting up webhooks, custom APIs, authentication, a bunch of layered approach
Right.
that traditionally was the approach. With a click of a few buttons and setting up some credentials, plugging in values basically.
Yeah.
Now I can have all my events land up from Salesforce come into AWS. It gives me a lot of power to innovate, create some custom applications, use that data.
Yeah.
with whatever.
So let's talk about that. You said you're not that great at coding. You're selling yourself a bit short, I think. But now let's say you actually did need to write some code, because what else are you going to be doing with that in AWS? Hopefully at some point you're going to write some code.
Hopefully.
So and hey, we're talking to developers here, right? So let's pretend we're going to write some code at the least.
Mhm.
So I get that event. Maybe you can open it up in CloudWatch logs again.
Mhm.
And so we've got this whole thing, right, with a whole lot of data in it. It's got
Yep.
fields like close date. It's got like is closed as a Boolean. There's all these different things in our payload, right? So I think what normally ends up happening when you're a developer is you go, okay, I've got to go and create a class file for this object that I'm going to use in my code.
Yep.
And what you end up having to do is really go through each of the things in the payload and figure out, what is this thing? Like, what are the fields in there? What are the values? What's the typing of those?
Yeah.
And so what I did notice is when you clicked on that event bus earlier, you had schema discovery enabled on that bus. And I think that helps speed up this kind of process of saying, well, I have these events from Salesforce. I now want to write code with them. So
Yep.
maybe tell us a little bit about that part of it and what you would do next.
Yep, absolutely. No, that's a great point. So basically, schema discovery, if I just go navigate back to the EventBridge console, and before I just quickly jump into schema discovery, what I'd also like to show is our partner event sources all automatically created. So it didn't even take like a minute or so.
Eventual consistency on those, maybe not quite real time on creating.
Yeah, not quite real time, because obviously the backend stuff takes a bit of time, but all it does is once a partner event source shows up, I just have to click on associate event bus. I don't even need to create an event bus. So all I just do is create an associated an event bus.
Just to orientate here, you had created this relay, you'd put it into this running state, but it takes a few minutes for Salesforce to like spin that up and connect it all up and create the consumer. So you were just going back now to show, okay, it had done that and created it. So what you would potentially do now is go back to that event bus, create rules on it, turn this schema discovery on it. That's good. Okay.
Exactly. Yep. So now that I have this new Salesforce event partner event source and event bus, I can create rules and configure targets and do whatever I want. But in addition to just coming back to what you just mentioned, the schema discovery piece. So on the left side, you can see that we have something called schemas. So schema is basically the pattern for your event. So as you mentioned, we have this event that comes in a JSON format. Obviously, it's not easy to use it, but when I turn on schema discovery, what EventBridge essentially does is all the events that are incoming onto that particular event bus, EventBridge automatically understands the schema for it. So if you check this discovered schema registry, I have this opportunity change event, and you can see that I have this I can see the entire schema. So as a developer, what that allows me to do is I can use those events into my downstream applications. And that is a really powerful feature here, because there's no point of using, having the events land up in EventBridge if you can't use them. And the other thing.
And we probably haven't got time today, but I mean, you can download these schemas sort of automatically in your IDE as well. So as you're coding in your IDE, you can just download the schema, and you're going to be able to have, as Nick said, your strongly typed stuff where you're coding, which is, I think, is awesome.
Yes,
Oh,
and it
I'm
also
jumping ahead.
natively integrates with VS Code, so we can share some links with you as well. But feel free to try this out. You can just download the bindings, code bindings, and use it in your code right away for all these four native languages. But in addition to that, if you use VS Code, you can easily use the AWS Resources Explorer to basically get those schemas and start leveraging the events that come in.
Cool. Julian, how are we doing on time? Do we need to stop an hour or can we go over?
No, unfortunately, we need to stop on the hour. There are other streams going on. I know there's lots to talk about, but
okay, cool. So
yeah.
let's hop ahead. I think what we want to talk about now is actually connecting the other way around, right? And so we talked about how we have these situations where we might not be using the event bus in our organization. We might be using Kafka or SQS. There's various other event brokers that we might have data in. And I think in particular, Kafka is a super popular one that we see folks using across especially larger organizations. And so the kind of scenario that we're going to hop into for the second demo is saying we have data in a Kafka instance. We're using MSK, managed streaming for Kafka, which is where AWS hosts Kafka for you. And we want to pull data out of that Kafka instance and deliver it to Salesforce. And I think, Aniket, in this case, the idea is like we have orders in Kafka, right?
Yep.
So we've got like thousands and thousands of orders in this Kafka instance, and we want to deliver them into Salesforce. Now, normally doing that would mean that you have to write some code that connects to your Kafka instance. And if you're not familiar with Kafka, that's quite a big learning curve, right? You have to go and learn things like partitioning. You've got to go and figure out like sequence IDs and keeping track of those so that you know exactly where your cursor is in Kafka.
It's probably in Java, only in Java. So
yeah, right. So you're kind of importing this library that has to eventually be in Java. And so there's a lot of complexity in that. And then just the connectivity to that as well. You have to go and figure out how to get your code to connect to that Kafka cluster. You've got to make sure you're in the same VPC. There's a lot of things to think about when connecting to Kafka. And the other thing that I think we see quite often is that Kafka streams might have a whole lot of events on them, but you're perhaps only interested in a subset of those, right? So maybe you only need, say there's a whole lot of events on this Kafka stream, but you only need the ones related to new orders being created. So your consumer will typically have to go and either build in some logic to go and filter out those events, or use something like KSQL. So again, like just a fairly high barrier to being able to connect to Kafka and pull data from it. And so I think that's where we see a lot of folks really interested in using EventBridge Pipes. Very quickly, pipes allow you to specify a source. They allow you to optionally filter, enrich, and transform the data. And then the pipe will push the events from that source to the target. And the sources can be various things like DynamoDB, Amazon MQ, SQS, Kinesis, and then critically Kafka. And it can be both self-hosted Kafka, or if you're using something like Confluent, it'll work with that, as well as managed streaming Kafka, which MSK is AWS's self-hosted, managed Kafka. So the pipe,
and even it's Kafka, not just in AWS, but literally Kafka on-prem. So it can be Kafka anywhere. So yeah, it's not just, don't think of it as just an AWS connection. Obviously with Confluent, with that model, but yeah, on-prem can be anywhere. Can be Kafka running on your Raspberry Pi if you're that keen.
Yeah.
Hopefully not.
So, okay, so I think let's hop into the next demo because we've got 9 minutes to get it done. So Aniket, while you fire that up, I'll give a quick background here. What we've set up for this demo, and we'll share the link to this. You can go and download the entire demo with the Kafka setup and everything else kind of created for you. But essentially, we have a whole lot of data that we are going to dump into a Kafka stream. Aniket's created an API gateway that has a Lambda function, which will like generate 1,000 random orders, all with names and details about that order. And it'll then put those into a Kafka stream. From there, we've created a pipe that'll consume from that Kafka stream and then actually decode the data in there. So we've got an enrichment. We'll talk about that quickly. And then it'll use API destinations to actually deliver those records from Kafka to Salesforce. So that's kind of the background to what we're doing here, right, Aniket?
Yep, absolutely.
Cool.
I think
Okay, so take it away.
awesome. So I think that provides a pretty good summary. But basically, what we're leveraging today is EventBridge Pipes. As you mentioned, pipe is basically a point-to-point integration that allows you to use your events from certain sources, filter it optionally, have some enrichment, and send it to specific targets. So I just clicked on create a pipe, and let's see if I give it a certain name. And if I click on sources, you can see there's a bunch of sources that are supported. Particularly, we are interested in the Kafka one. So obviously, we've got two flavors. We have the Amazon managed Kafka as well as self-managed. So if you're using Confluent or on-prem Kafka, you can use this as well. But for this demo, we are leveraging Amazon MSK, and I already have this MSK cluster configured. But in addition to this, we have the option to provide particular topic, the topic name, authentication, like IAM or SASL or Scram. The next part is an optional filtering. So if you want to filter out for specific events like order, status created, or create complex filters, you can do that. For this demo, we don't really need that. In addition, there's an optional step for enrichment. So you can use AWS Lambda to further enrich your payload. So for this demo, what we've done is because the data that comes into MSK is base 64 decoded, we are leveraging AWS Lambda to decode that payload and also make sure that it is adhering to the schema that Salesforce expects, because Salesforce does expect a certain schema.
So you're not just going to get data from Kafka directly into Salesforce. In a lot of these end-to-end systems that's flowing through a pipe, there's going to be some data transformation that you would probably need.
Yeah.
What I'll say here is I think the objective for us on the pipe side, on the server side, is to eventually chip away at as many of these types of areas where you might need to write some custom code as possible. So I think in future what you'll see we'll do is we'll have a base 64 decode intrinsic function in the pipe that you can actually use. And I think over time we'll get more advanced with transformations as well. And so the idea is that you should be able to get to the point where you can just say, look, this Kafka stream has got base 64 encoded data. I need to decode it before I send it to my target. And so I think over time we'll add more and more capabilities like that to the pipe. But today, instead of your Lambda function having to sit there and actually go and invoke the target itself, you're writing a very simple Lambda function that all it does is base 64 decode and then do some slight changes to the names of the fields before it returns it. So you have a very fast Lambda function that is running, and it's not sitting there using a whole lot of time while it opens network connections.
Yep, I think that will be very handy, because right now for this demo, we are primarily using the Lambda function to base 64 decode, but also to transform the schema so that it's in compliance with the schema that Salesforce expects. But once that enrichment is done, we have the option to send it to a bunch of targets. For this demo, because we want to send it to Salesforce, we have set up something called API destination. And API destination is nothing but a way to send your payload to custom HTTPS endpoints. Could be public endpoints, could be particular SaaS partners. So in this case, we have the Salesforce endpoint. And the cool thing with API destination is, in addition to just configuring this, it has a bunch of features like you can set rate limiting, you can add some header parameters and query string parameters. So it's really feature rich here. And obviously, because just to save some time, I already have this pipe configured. I'll just quickly show what this does. So we have the source set up as MSK stream, an MR MSK cluster. And we have the enrichment Lambda function. Let me quickly showcase what this enrichment Lambda function basically does. So as you can see here, it's, I wouldn't say no code, but pretty low code. All it's doing is decoding the payload and just making sure that every field has an underscore C at the end, because that's what Salesforce needs. And I'll show how that looks like in just a second in Salesforce. But coming back to the pipes, once the enrichment piece is done, we just send it to a Salesforce, our API destination, which is the Salesforce endpoint. And as Nick mentioned,
just quickly on that API destination, I think the cool thing there is that, typically if you were going to make this call to Salesforce through a Lambda function or some code that you've written yourself, you would have to handle things like refreshing your access token for Salesforce, because that expires after a certain number of hours. And so with the API destination, you're able to offload that to EventBridge and just say, here's my Salesforce URL for getting access tokens. Here's my client ID and secret. We use the kind of OAuth pattern to just be able to reach out to Salesforce whenever that token expires and automatically refresh it for you. So you don't have to write any authentication code. You're just configuring that. You can also set rate control on this. Sometimes you have a target. In Salesforce's case, not so much a concern, but sometimes you have a target that you don't want to overwhelm. And so you can use the rate control feature to just limit how quickly you call that API.
Yep.
So are things basically live going into the Kafka stream at the moment? Is there stuff there?
So I think let's hop to that part of the demo. We're going to call an API, and maybe just, can you hop over to your Salesforce instance before we do that? Let's check. You've got this orders page where there are no orders showing up. Let's go to them. That's empty. And so you're going to make a curl request to your API or HTTP request to your API.
I have this API gateway set up to make sure that once this endpoint is, I do this post request, all the events get sent up. Sorry, one sec. I'll just do a curl request from the terminal.
Typical, denied at the last moment.
So I have this curl request, and once I make this, what essentially ends up happening is I'm dumping about 1,000 events into my Kafka, and eventually, basically, once they are in MSK, Pipes takes care of picking up each payload, each event, transforming it through the Lambda function, and sending it to my API destination, which is the Salesforce. So if I refresh,
you made it.
In a matter of seconds, I see that the events start coming in. So as you can see, we already have about 40-ish events out of the 1,000 events popping up.
Well, that is amazing. I think there's a lot of complexity we've got into here, but we've actually delved into a lot of the complexity, but a lot of that's hidden from you. It's literally a bit of configuration code. You've got things flowing from Kafka through EventBridge Pipes with very little, some configuration, some filtering, some enhancement, which is very simple, and directly into Salesforce. And then also the other way around. Remember, if we can link back to the first demo, you could then take that information from Salesforce. Something maybe happened or someone else does some processing on the Salesforce data, and then send that back into EventBridge Event Bus and have this sort of bi-directional communication. So yeah, this is so awesome. We sort of do need to stop. So Nick, you've probably got 10 seconds if you...
the last thing I would say is this example that Aniket showed is actually on GitHub. I think it's on Serverless Land, Aniket.
Yes.
Yep. I've put the link, but I will add it again. So yeah, it's on. Yeah, so you can literally play with this all yourself. So, well, Aniket and Nick, thanks so much for joining us in Office Hours. It was an absolute blast. Just quickly, next week we're going to be delving into workflows, talking about Apache Airflow and step functions. So join us same time, same place next week. But thank you very much, everybody. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Aniket, for 2 awesome demos and a great explanation. Until next time. Bye-bye.
See you all.